In the centuries after the War of the Ancients, silence fell upon the ruins of the Kaldorei Empire. The Night Elves turned inward, embracing druidism and the quiet cycles of nature. To them, arcane magic was the echo of a sin too great to repeat, a force they now feared more than they revered. It was outlawed entirely due to the fear of attracting the Burning Legion to Azeroth again, its practice punished by death. But not all could forget the taste of power. The highborn who had survived the Sundering still felt its pull burning in their veins. Magic had been their birthright, their art, their language, their soul. To live without it was to fade. Among them rose Dothrmar Sunstrider, a proud descendant of Ajara's court, who could not abide this new age of restraint. Where others saw wisdom in the druid's silence, he saw cowardice. The highborn began to weave spells in secret, then openly, daring their brethren to stop them. It was more than rebellion, it was conviction. They believed the Kaldorei were destined for greatness once more, and the greatness could only rise through mastery of the arcane. To deny magic was to deny their very nature. When the archdruid Malfurion Stormrage forbade their craft, Dothrmar defied him. His followers unleashed a storm of raw sorcery upon Ashenvale, a tempest meant not to destroy, but to remind the world what their power could be. The skies burned for days. The Kaldorei answered not with slaughter, but with exile. They could not bring themselves to slay so many of their own kin. Instead, they cast out Dothrmar and his followers, banishing them forever from Mount Hyjal and the Well of Eternity's light. Stripped of immortality, the highborn accepted their fate with cold pride. They would leave this forested prison and forge a destiny of their own, far from druidic scorn, far from chains. Before they departed, they stole one vial of pure essence from the well, a fragment of divinity, hidden away by Dothrmar himself. Then they built ships of white wood and gold, setting sail into the storms of the Great Sea, toward the horizon where the maelstrom raged. None among them knew what waited beyond, but they sailed anyway, for pride, for purpose, for the echo of eternity. After a long journey, they made landfall at last upon a continent unknown, wild, untamed, and vast. In its southern reaches, among rolling hills and deep woods, they found humans dwelling in scattered tribes who called the land Tirisfal. For months, the highborn wandered its green expanse, searching for a place where the arcane sang to them once more. In time, they began to feel it, a thrum beneath the land, subtle yet constant. It was no Well of Eternity, but the power was real, and to the hands of seasoned arcanists, it beckoned like a half-remembered song. Perhaps, they thought, they could restore what had been lost. Yet as they delved into the land's magic, they found corruption within its depths, a sickness that crept into the mind and drove some to madness. The highborn began to change in other ways too. Deprived of the well's radiance, their skin paled from violet to peach. Their tall frames diminished, and age, once a stranger, now brushed their faces. For the first time in millennia, they felt the weight of time. Fear took root. Some urged war upon the primitive humans, believing their settlement stood atop the most potent ley lines. Dothrmar forbade it. He saw the same dark energy that had poisoned their minds, and he understood. The land itself was dangerous. To remain would mean ruin. And so once more the exiles took to the road. They turned north, guided by scouts who spoke of verdant forests and rivers alive with ley energy. The journey would be long and harsh, but in Dothrmar's heart, a single truth burned like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Their destiny had not ended in exile. It had only begun. The journey tested them. Harsh winds and bitter storms swept across the highlands of the eastern kingdoms. A blizzard caught them in the mountains and held them there for nearly a month. For the first time in living memory, the highborn began to starve. It was only through the unexpected kindness of primitive mountain-dwelling humans that the expedition survived at all. The lesson was cruel. Severed from the Well of Eternity, they were no longer eternal, no longer untouchable. When the storm passed and the paths cleared, they pressed on, and at last they found it, a land alive with magic, where golden woodland stretched out in every direction, and the ground itself hummed with power. But the land was not empty. From the shadowed trees came watchers, fierce and territorial. The highborn had stepped into the domain of the Amani trolls, and the trolls had no intention of sharing it. Long before the highborn crossed the sea, before exile and ruin, the Amani had warred with the children of the stars. Their hatred of the elves ran older than memory, kindled in the age of Azara and nursed in blood ever since. So when the first white-haired trespassers set foot in their sacred forests, the Amani did not hesitate. They struck with ferocity and without warning. Raiding parties descended from the trees like storms, cutting down the outsiders wherever they found them. The highborn, caught in unfamiliar woods, soon learned to dread the crack of a branch or the snap of a spearhead in the dark. But they did not retreat. They answered fury with fire, wielding arcane might that turned air to ash and forest to flame. For every troll ambush, there was an elven reprisal. For every fallen elf, a dozen Amani perished in kind. Soon, fear walked both paths. What began as hostility became hatred, raw and unyielding, and the land between them soaked up every drop of it. Yet still the elves advanced. Guided by the pull of the ley lines, they pressed deeper into the forest until they reached the nexus they had long sought. A place where the very bones of the world converged in torrents of untamed power. At its heart lay a lake, calm and untouched. It was there that Dothrmar revealed what he had carried all these years. From beneath his cloak he drew a vial, a single sliver of the old world, filled with liquid drawn from the well of eternity itself. It had been taken from the Kael'thas before their exile, one of the few created by Illidan Stormrage before his fall. Without ceremony, Dothrmar poured its contents into the lake. The reaction was immediate. Light surged skyward, tearing through cloud and canopy alike. The water blazed with radiant power, reshaping the air around it, and in that moment, a new well was born. They named it the Sunwell, a beacon of their future and a tribute to the boldness of the journey that had brought them there. From that day onward, they turned from the moon. The Kael'thas had looked to night for strength. The highborn would take theirs from the sun. They abandoned the name their ancestors had once claimed and called themselves something new, High Elves. The magic of the Sunwell coursed through them, brighter than anything they had wielded since the days of Kalimdor. It sharpened their craft, renewed their purpose. With it, they carved a kingdom from the wild. They called it Quel'Thalas, meaning high home in Thalassian. It would be the shining jewel of their people, raised from exile and lit by fire, a civilization born to eclipse the ruins they had left behind. From the light of the Sunwell, the High Elves drew strength, not only to defend but to build. Magic flowed like lifeblood through their veins and into the land, shaping forest and stone alike into living memory. Where once there had been wilderness, now silver spires reached skyward. In time, a city emerged at the heart of Quel'Thalas, radiant and eternal. They called it Silvermoon. But not all saw beauty in its rise. To the Amani, the new kingdom was an insult carved into sacred ground. The High Elves had raised their capital atop ancient troll ruins, burial sites, temples, places of power once held in reverence by generations of Amani. Now, those ruins lay paved over, glimmering with arcane fire, humming with the energy of a foreign sun. The trolls would not stand for it. They came in force, 10 for every elf, savage and unrelenting. Again and again they hurled themselves against the growing kingdom, fighting to reclaim what they believed had been stolen. The elves stood fast, wielding the full might of the Sunwell, but even then it was not enough to turn the tide easily. Dothrmar himself took to the field, leading battle after battle with spell and steel. Each victory was carved in blood. Each inch of ground was bought with sacrifice. But they held. Little by little, the borders of Quel'Thalas were secured. A kingdom was not given, it was earned, day by day, with fire and pain. Yet not all danger came from the outside. As the years passed, whispers stirred among the High Elves. Some began to fear their growing reliance on the arcane, fearing not the trolls, but what greater force their magic might one day call. The memory of the legions still lingered, buried but not forgotten. Dothrmar listened. He summoned his greatest arcanists and set them to a quiet, long task, to hide Quel'Thalas from prying eyes. Over the course of decades, they raised monolithic runestones around the edges of their realm, towering wards etched with power, each one anchoring a spell that veiled the kingdom from detection. The barrier was called Bandonoriel, the Gatekeeper. It would muffle their magic, weaken foreign sorcery, and shield their lands from the gaze of demons and mortals alike. The Amani felt its weight. Unable to pierce the barrier with open war, they withdrew to their ancient temple city named Zul'Aman. But the hatred did not fade. They turned to ambush and shadow, striking at elven caravans and patrols that dared to move beyond Bandonoriel's reach. In response, a new order of warriors rose, the Farstriders. They were elite rangers that would defend the kingdom for ages to come. Within the safety of their wards, the High Elves flourished. Seasons passed, but winter never returned. The Sunwell sustained an eternal spring, and from its warmth came wonders. Silvermoon grew more beautiful with each passing year, white stone kissed by crimson banners, gardens woven through arcane architecture, bridges arched like ribbon over water enchanted to shimmer in daylight. Gothamar had done what few exiles ever could. He had given his people a future. When he stepped down, the crown passed to his bloodline, and the kingdom endured. The Convocation of Silvermoon was formed, several noble lords chosen to guide and govern, yet it was the Sunstrider line that held the heart of the realm. For a time, there was peace. In the years that followed, a new name would rise, an Asterian Sunstrider, great-grandson of Dothramar, heir to a kingdom born in war. He took the crown in a time of gathering storm. The Amani had not forgotten, and war would return. Long after the highborn raised their spires and etched wards across the land, the trolls of Zul'Aman still remembered. Deep within those tangled forests where the canopy blotted out the sun and drums beat low and slow beneath the leaves, they whispered of what had been taken. These lands had once been theirs, sacred ground trampled by elven boots, carved through with roads that bled arrogance. Centuries had passed since the last great war, but vengeance did not fade. It lingered, hot beneath the skin, coiled behind every tooth and tusk. Yet time had not been kind to the Amani. Pride had curdled into isolation, strife hollowed their strength. Though their warriors remained fierce and their voodoo potent, they were no longer bound by a single vision, no rallying cry, no warlord to unify their rage. Only fragments of a once great empire, each holding fast to the past while the fire of their future guttered low. The dream of conquest still lived, but it flickered now, like a torch struggling against the wind. Then came the Zandalari. Elders of an older age, the Zandalari saw themselves as the stewards of all troll kind, high priests, lore keepers, and kings in all but name. They had watched as the sundering scattered the troll empires and dimmed the power of their people. Now, at last, they sought to restore it. In the Amani, they saw a weapon worth reforging. A once great tribe with the strength to reclaim dominance in the eastern kingdoms. But strength alone would not be enough. The Zandalari brought unity. They brought the promise of the Loa, ancient demigods who would march to war beside their faithful. And to lead the Amani, they named a champion, Jintha, the tribe's fiercest warrior. Raids followed, small at first, quiet incursions, probing the elven borders, testing strength and response. The trolls cloaked their true numbers. Each skirmish struck deeper, burned brighter. The High Elves could sense something building, but they did not know how large the storm had grown. Then it came. Without warning, the forests erupted. Tens of thousands of trolls surged from the tree line, an avalanche of steel and fire. The Loa marched with them, vast and fearsome, their presence igniting the battlefield with raw divine power. The Amani roared with newfound strength, driven not only by vengeance but by blessing. Magic shimmered across their blades, enchantments fueled by ancient rites. The ground shook beneath their assault. Quel'Thalas bled. The High Elves, once unassailable in their pride, were pushed back with startling speed. The wards of Bandonoriel slowed the tide, but could not hold it. The outer reaches of the kingdom were torn apart, villages burned, watchposts shattered. Even with the Sunwell's power at their backs, the elves could not understand how the trolls' enhancements struck with such force, how their own magic faltered in the face of their foe. Desperation turned to theft. Elven spellcasters began to steal secrets from the captured troll mystics. Among them, the renowned Zanza the Restless. Rituals were unmade and remade in arcane likeness. With these stolen enhancements, the High Elves crafted weapons of their own, twisted from the knowledge of their enemies. The Zandalari watched, pleased. The tide had turned, and at long last, the might of the troll race, united, blessed, and burning with purpose, stood once more on the edge of empire. The trolls were not content to reclaim their borders. They sought dominion. As the war between the High Elves and the Amani raged, its echoes reached far beyond the forested lands of Quel'Thalas. Southward in the stone-walled kingdom of Strom, King Thoradin watched the conflict with growing unease. He had seen what came of unchecked ambition, and he feared how far the trolls might march if left unchallenged. Still, caution held him. Even as word spread of ruined villages, fallen towers, and demigods walking alongside the Amani, Thoradin remained unmoved. To intervene, he believed, would be to gamble the future of his own people. Strom would not bleed for another's war. But then came the elves. Emissaries from Anasterian Sunstrider stood before the king and spoke not with pride, but with urgency. They spoke of fire and slaughter, of sacred groves defiled and cities brought low, and of the Loa, ancient spirits made flesh, treading the earth in war. If Quel'Thalas fell, they warned, Strom would not be spared. The king listened. He gathered his advisors. They spoke long into the night of honor, of risk, of the world that would remain if the trolls triumphed. And at last, Thoradin made his choice. He would stand with the elves, but not for free. In exchange for the strength of Strom's armies, the High Elves would offer something far rarer than coin or title: knowledge, the arcane arts. For generations, mankind had looked upon elven magic with awe and fear. Even Thoradin, ever wary of sorcery, understood its power. If his people were to face the Loa in battle, they would need more than steel. Anasterian hesitated. He knew well what mortal hands might do with arcane flame. Magic, once given, could not be taken back, and mankind, with its brief lives and burning hunger, might prove too reckless to wield it wisely. But Quel'Thalas stood on the edge of ruin. His people had no more blood to give alone. He agreed. Only 100 would be taught, no more. A chosen few, trained in the rudimentary paths of magic, under Elven supervision and with great caution. The pact was made. Elven magi crossed into Strom and began their work. At first, there was skepticism, but as the months passed, the skepticism gave way to astonishment. Though crude in form and undisciplined in technique, the humans learned quickly. Too quickly. They lacked finesse, but not power, and in their hands, the arcane burned as fiercely as it ever had beneath elven stars. A bond had been forged, and the world would never be the same. When the final lesson was taught, the time for words passed. The human magi, once novices under elven tutelage, had been shaped into weapons, raw, burning, untested. With their training complete, Arathor moved to war. More than 20,000 soldiers gathered in the shadow of the Alterac Mountains, steel glinting in the pale light. At their head rode King Thoradin, crowned in purpose and flame. Together with the High Elves, they formed a pincer of vengeance. Elves to the north, men to the south, and turned their wrath upon the trolls. The armies of Arathor struck first, crashing into the Amani rear with devastating force. From the north, elven battle mages ignited the sky, shattering troll lines with arcane fire. Surrounded, pressed from both directions, Jintha did not falter. He believed the humans would break first. That their discipline was shallow, their strength fleeting, he vowed to crush Thoradin in the south and return north to purge Quel'Thalas in full. But Thoradin had planned for more than brute force. Feigning retreat, the king lured the Amani into the high passes of Alterac, where narrow paths and sheer cliffs turned numbers into weakness. There, the trolls were bled, ambushed, and driven back, their warbands dwindling with every mile. The final battle came just beyond the borders of Quel'Thalas. There, in a valley scorched by months of war, the Amani turned to make their last stand, trapped between the elven legions to the north and Thoradin's forces to the south. Still, they fought like beasts cornered, but the allies had not yet revealed their final hand. The humans stepped forward. Until that moment, the trolls had believed the men of Arathor relied only on blade and shield, but now cloaked figures emerged from behind the front lines. The human magi raised their hands and the air itself recoiled. The ground split, arcane fury poured from the heavens, torrents of fire born not of the Sunwell or Loa, but of mortal will forged into unity. The elves joined them, amplifying the spell until the sky became flame. Together they cast a single searing incantation that swept across the battlefield like the wrath of gods. The Amani burned. Loa and warrior alike were caught in the firestorm. Jintha was among the first to fall, consumed in the blaze that ended an age. Leaderless, the trolls broke. What remained of their army fled north, only to be hunted down without mercy. There would be no recovery, no return. The defeat sent ripples far beyond the battlefield. The Zandalari, who had once stood as proud guides of troll kind, watched in horror. Shamed and shattered, their emissaries returned to their island in silence, burdened by a loss they had never thought possible. For them, it was a reckoning. For troll kind, a wound that would not soon heal. But in Quel'Thalas, it was the dawn of a golden age. For months, the streets of Silvermoon echoed with song and celebration. The alliance with Arathor had not only saved the kingdom, it had elevated it. In gratitude, the High Elves pledged their loyalty to Thoradin and to the line that would follow. A pact sealed in fire, a future written in blood, and a new chapter begun. Though exiled by their kin in Kalimdor, the High Elves of Quel'Thalas never severed all ties. Time had weathered the bitterness of their sundering, and though mistrust still lingered between the children of Sun and Moon, there were moments when ancient blood stirred and unity took root once more. During one of the many Amani incursions, Ranger General Talanus Windrunner stood not alone, but shoulder to shoulder with a Merrill Shade Warden of the Unseen Path, a Kaldari huntress of rare skill and quiet legend. Their alliance was brief, forged in necessity, but it marked a rare moment when old bloodlines moved as one. Long before even that, another thread bound the Kaldari and High Elves. Ranger Captain Ariel, her deeds now half lost to time, once rode alongside General Chandris Feathermoon, the stalwart commander of the Sentinels. The records do not say why, only that they fought, and that they fought together. Such moments were rare, but they weren't forgotten. As the centuries rolled forward, Quel'Thalas grew, not just in strength, but in knowledge. Its cities glimmered with arcane brilliance, its forests flourished beneath eternal spring. Yet even in its splendor, the elves looked outward. South, in the rising spires of Dalaran, a new kingdom of magic was born, and from Silvermoon, some were drawn to its promise. They came not to conquer, but to teach, to share, to learn. Among them were names that would echo through history. Kael'thas Sunstrider, Crown Prince of Quel'Thalas, who walked the halls of the Kirin Tor with quiet purpose, and Romoth, who would one day become Grand Magister and forge his own legend in fire and fury. Between Dalaran and Silvermoon, a bond was formed, of scrolls, of spellcraft, of respect and rivalry, and for more than 2,000 years it held. Magisters of Quel'Thalas studied beside the mages of Dalaran, their teachings woven together, their ambitions mirrored in crystal and flame. In those days, the paths of men and elves crossed often, and though each kingdom stood alone, their fates had begun to quietly intertwine. Around 2,600 years before the Dark Portal, the air above Dalaran began to shimmer. The fabric of reality, once whole, had grown thin. So many had come to the city seeking mastery over the arcane. So many spells had been cast without ward or restraint. The city pulsed with raw magic, and the veil between worlds began to fray. At first, it was subtle. Odd shadows at the corners of torchlight, whispers that slipped through closed doors. But in time, it became undeniable. The demons had found their way back. Drawn by the echoes of careless sorcery, they slipped through the cracks, not in legions, but in whispers, in claws, in possession and flame. The magicrat lords of Arathor, alarmed by the rising danger, turned to those who had faced this threat before, the High Elves. The convocation of Silvermoon answered. Elven magi crossed into Dalaran, their presence quiet but swift, and began their study. What they found disturbed them. The breaches were still small, but growing. and they had seen what followed such openings in ages past. They warned the magicrats the arcane could not be treated as a birthright. Without structure, without limits, it would invite the Burning Legion once more. It was not yet a crisis, but it would be, unless humanity reined in its ambition. But the Lords of Dalaran did not listen. Fearful of losing power, they rejected the Elves' counsel. They would not shackle their magic. Instead, they forged a solution of their own, hidden, quiet, and deadly. They formed the Council of Tirisfal. In the shadows, the council began its work. Its members, chosen from the wisest and most disciplined among the Magi, were tasked with rooting out the Legion's agents wherever they might surface. Their mission was secret, their methods absolute. At the heart of this order stood a single champion, a living weapon known only as the Spearhead. Empowered by the Council's combined strength, this guardian would strike down the Legion's hand before it could reach the throat of the world. While the city above flourished in light and learning, the Council watched from beneath, guarding Azeroth in silence, and warning those few who would listen of the cost of reckless power. Sometime later, a time long lost to recorded memory, a moment came when the sons and daughters of Arathor and Quel'Thalas turned their eyes westward. No scrolls named the year, nor song the voyage. Only that they left the eastern kingdoms behind and crossed the sea together, human and high elf alike. Not as conquerors, not as allies, but as kin. In the lands beyond, far from the politics of their forebears, they carved a new empire. The people who emerged called themselves Arathi, a people bound not by origin but by purpose, and from that unity they built something neither race could have crafted alone. Back in the east, the world turned. In the decades before the First War, as Azeroth basked in the quiet lull between storms, the High Elves remained ever watchful. Though they held ties to the seven kingdoms of man, much of their strength was still spent fending off the lingering menace of the Amani, whose hunger for vengeance had never faded. Even in times of peace, borders mattered. At some point, long before tyrannous Menethil would wear his crown, his grandfather stood before the banners of Silvermoon and struck a pact. Between the ancient trees of Quel'Thalas and the green fields of Lordaeron, a boundary was drawn. Not in blood, but in accord. It would hold, for a time. Nearly 3,000 years passed, empires rose and fell, kings were crowned and buried, and still the blood of Thoradin endured, thin but unbroken. When the kingdom of Stormwind fell beneath the iron tide of the Orcish Horde, it was Anduin Lothar, last of Thoradin's line, who carried the shattered remnants of his people toward Lordaeron by sea. After the long journey, he stood before King Tyrannus of Lordaeron, and gave warning that the orcs were coming, and they would not stop. King Tyrannus listened, and then following his talk with Lothar, he summoned the rulers of the Seven Kingdoms. And from their uneasy alliance was born a new pact, the Alliance of Lordaeron, with Lothar being named supreme commander of its forces. And as blades were drawn and banners raised, Tyrannus sent a message north. He wrote to King Anasterion Sunstrider, ruler of Quel'Thalas, and called upon a memory as old as war itself, a time when Thoradin and the elves had once stood together against a shared enemy. Now his heir stood before them, and the world called for unity once more. Anasterion received the message. He had not forgotten the Troll Wars, he had blood in them, but time had dulled old alliances, and the world beyond the Eversong Woods had grown distant. Still, he sent a small force, led by Ilaria Windrunner, and they rode south beneath the banners of Silvermoon, not in strength, but in symbolism. But it was not yet war for the elves, not yet their fight. Anasterion hoped the Horde might bypass Quel'Thalas entirely. But Anasterion's hopes were dashed. It did not take long for war to find the forest of Quel'Thalas. When Orgrim Doomhammer turned the Horde north, fire followed. The outer edges of the Eversong Woods began to burn, and smoke drifted through groves long untouched by war. But it was not only orcs who marched beneath the banners of conquest. The Amani had returned. Led by the ever-cunning Zul'jin, the trolls had forged a pact with the Horde, but it wasn't due to loyalty, it was due to their hatred for the elves. Their vengeance now rode on the backs of wolves and warbeasts. Old blood debts had been reignited. Worse still, the invaders had found a way past the elven wards. Orcish necromancers, twisting the secrets they had stolen, had managed to corrupt several of the runestones that ringed the forest. Where once arcane shields had veiled the kingdom, now fissures opened. Their dark magic seeped into the land, allowing the Horde to press closer to Silvermoon than any foe in an age. But even with their corrupted spells and enslaved red dragons, they could not breach Bandonoriel, the gatekeeper still held. And yet, for Anasterion, that was no longer enough. When Ilaria Windrunner returned from a raid on the Troll Vanguard, she brought proof of what had come. A severed troll head, still fresh. The chamber fell silent. Then the fury came. The ancient king rose in a rage, and his voice rang like thunder through the marble halls of Silvermoon. There would be no more hesitation, no more waiting. The full might of Quel'Thalas would be unleashed. Under the newly appointed Ranger General Sylvanas Windrunner, the High Elves joined the Alliance in full. Archers and rangers poured from the forest like silver-edged wind. Spellbreakers, destroyers, and war mages took to the field. Even artisans and craftsmen were sent to the aid in the war effort, building forges and mills where the human kingdoms faltered. The tide had finally turned. Faced with unrelenting resistance and unable to advance, the Horde withdrew south to regroup and besiege Lordaeron. But in their retreat, they abandoned the Amani, and the betrayal did not go unnoticed. Zul'jin and his warriors, seething with fury, remained behind. What followed was a battle born of spite, savage, hopeless, and without mercy. The trolls fought not to win, but to kill, to burn, to wound the land that had once been theirs. But the rangers of Quel'Thalas did not yield. They hunted the Amani through forest and ruin, driving them back blow by blow. Many trolls fell. Their warbands shattered, and at last Zul'jin himself was brought low, captured by Haldoran Brightwing and his company of rangers. But even in defeat, he would not be caged. Wounded, furious, and alone, Zul'jin escaped into the wilds, vanishing into shadow. But the cost had been paid, and Quel'Thalas had stood its ground once more. The forest still smoldered, but it did not fall. Though the High Elves stood alongside the Alliance in the Second War, their allegiance had been born of necessity, not loyalty. And once the Horde was broken and the banners lowered, old doubts returned. The humans were the first to turn away. In the years that followed the war, the kingdoms of men drifted from their elven allies. Promises faded into silence, gratitude cooled into forgetfulness. And the High Elves, ever watchful, felt the shift like frost creeping through golden leaves. They withdrew, quietly and with growing coldness. Even so, they still lent aid where magic stirred the air. Netherguard Keep, built to watch over the scarred skies of the Blasted Lands, received elven support, but not out of kinship. The arcane anomaly fascinated them. The threat to humanity mattered less than the mystery of the Dark Portal itself. In Silvermoon, King Anasterion brooded over deeper wounds. He had not forgotten how the Alliance had turned its gaze elsewhere in the war's darkest hour, how his fire swept the Eversong woods and the Amani trolls surged in vengeance. The armies of man had pulled back toward Blackrock Spire, leaving Quel'Thalas to bleed alone. To Anasterion, it had been betrayal, the price of trust. Though not all High Elves shared their king's fury, many did. And as the years passed, the tension thickened like smoke in the canopy. At last, the break came. Citing the burning of their sacred lands and the failures of human leadership, Anasterion withdrew Quel'Thalas from the Alliance of Lordaeron. He reminded Tyrannus that the line of Thoradin had been honored, the Sunstriders had paid their debt, and with Lothar dead and the Orcs defeated, their bond was fulfilled. Not all agreed, though. Some priests and magi, and noticeably Prince Kael'thas Sunstrider, chose to remain in the human kingdoms, believing unity still held value. But the kingdom itself turned inward, its enchanted borders drawing close like a veil. Others soon followed. The withdrawal of Quel'Thalas sent ripples to the fractured alliance. Gen Greymane of Gilneas and Thor's Trollbane of Stromgarde followed Anasterion's lead, severing ties that had once bound the kingdoms together in a war. The sundering had begun, not by blade but by silence. And though peace still held, it rang hollow. For both elf and man, the golden age was fading, and none yet saw the shadow that crept beneath it. Years passed and the shadow came. It began quietly, whispered on wind and rumor, a sickness spreading through the villages of Lordaeron, leaving only silence and rot in its wake. The people called it a plague, but this was no fever of the flesh. It was a curse, woven by unseen hands, one that did not kill, but claimed. At the heart of this rising horror stood Prince Arthas Menethil, a knight of the Silver Hand. He rode against the plague with fire in his heart, vowing to save his kingdom from ruin, but every step he took brought him closer to the edge. His search for answers led him to Northrend. There, beneath frozen skies, he found a blade of legend, Frostmourne, a rune blade of blackened soul steel, whispered to grant victory to those who would wield it. Arthas took the sword, and with it he gave up his soul. Now remade as the Lich King's most terrible servant, a Death Knight without mercy, Arthas returned to Lordaeron not as a savior, but as the kingdom's executioner. He struck down his own father in the throne room and destroyed the kingdom he had once sworn to protect. Lordaeron fell. Its towers crumbled, its temples were drowned in ash, and from its ruins the scourge spread, a tide of undeath that rolled across the land with cold, relentless purpose. The neighboring kingdoms rallied in desperation. Even Quel'Thalas, long withdrawn from the affairs of man, could not ignore the spreading rot. Though no longer bound by alliance oath, they sent forth priests of the light to combat the darkness, a gesture born not of diplomacy but dread. But the hour was already late, and the dead did not rest. The death of Lordaeron was only the beginning. From the shadows stepped Tichondrius, dreadlord of the Nothrazim, and keeper of the Lich King's chains. To Arthas, now servant and champion of death, he delivered a grim task, the resurrection of Quel'Thas, the necromancer Arthas himself had slain in pursuit of righteousness. But death had never been the end. Quel'Thas was fated for a darker purpose, to become the vessel by which Archimonde, one of the Burning Legion's mightiest lords, would be drawn into the world. For this unholy rebirth, only one place on Azeroth held enough power, the Sunwell, heart of the High Elven Kingdom. To reach it, Arthas needed more than an army. He needed a traitor. He found one in Darkon Drathir, a magister of Quel'Thalas whose pride outweighed his loyalty. Bitterness had rotted him from within, a man who believed himself cheated of greatness, passed over by peers who never saw his worth. Arthas saw it, or said he did. With a voice cold and calm, the Death Knight offered Darkon the power he craved, the promise of elevation beyond mortal beings. All he needed to do was betray his kin, his people, his king. And Darkon, drawn like a moth to flame, agreed. He handed Arthas two sacred relics of the kingdom, the Stone of Flame and Stone of Light, twin wards designed to repel the undead. Now turned against their purpose, they became keys to the realm's undoing. With the wards broken, the gates opened. The defenses of Quel'Thalas, long thought impenetrable, faltered. And so the march began. Arthas led the Scourge through the tranquil beauty of Eversong Woods, across the Elrindar River, leaving ash and silence in his wake. The runestones, ancient sentinels that once pulsed with protection, shattered beneath the weight of the dead. Their path carved a scar across the land, one that still bleeds to this day. They call it the Dead Scar. To halt the plague's advance, the elves set fire to their own forest. Around the shattered runestone, once a bulwark against evil, flames rose, a desperate bid to cauterize the land before it blackened further. But the fire could not hold back death. The Scourge pressed on with unrelenting hunger, battering down the ancient elf gates and sweeping into Silvermoon like a tide of rot and ruin. At the front of the kingdom's defense stood Sylvanas Windrunner, Ranger General of Quel'Thalas. Bow in hand, eyes unblinking before the storm, she led the defense with fury and resolve. But no mortal blade could turn aside what followed. Frostmourne found her, and with it, the end. But Arthas was not content with death. In mockery of her valor, he defiled her soul, ripping it from her broken body and twisting it into something cold, hollow, and full of hate. Thus was born the first Banshee. The city's last hopes fell in swift succession. The sacred blade, Quel'Thalas, was broken. King Anasterion, his heart lit by the fury of ages, was cut down. Grand Magister Belavir, the convocation of Silvermoon, and countless defenders perished with their people. The streets of Silvermoon ran red beneath crumbling spires. Victory belonged to the dead. Arthas, having carved a rune from the shining jewel of the elves, carried out his final rite. Deep within the heart of the Sunwell, he submerged the mangled remains of Quel'Thalas, staining the well's waters with death. The sacred font boiled and blackened. What rose from its depths was no man, but a lich, reborn in cold, eternal sorcery. Far to the south, another fate stirred. In the battered halls of Dalaran, Jaina Proudmoore worked tirelessly to rally those who still lived. Convinced by a mysterious prophet that salvation lay not in the east but across the sea, she gathered every soul she could, soldiers, scholars, and scattered survivors of Quel'Thalas among them. And then she sailed west, into uncertain waters, bearing the last embers of hope in a world fast slipping into shadow. When the news of Quel'Thalas' ruin reached the towers of Dalaran, Prince Kael'thas Sunstrider, last of his noble line, abandoned the mage city and made for home. He found no kingdom awaiting him, only ash, silence, and resentment. Lor'themar Therin and the few survivors still able to fight had held together what they could. When Kael'thas returned, it was not as a savior, but as a ghost. A prince absent in the hour of his people's greatest need. Whispers followed him through the broken halls, that he had lingered too long among humans, that he had always cared more for Dalaran than for the land of his birth. He did not deny it. In truth, he had often felt a stranger to Quel'Thalas, too open for its cloistered ways, too curious about the world beyond the forest border. And yet, despite the distance in his heart, he had never stopped loving his people. Now they were his to lead, whether they welcomed him or not. So he bowed his head at his father's funeral pyre, walked the shattered streets of Silvermoon, and came at last to the place where all things had unraveled, the Sunwell. What had once pulsed with radiant life now seethed with corruption. Necromantic currents coiled through the air, poisoning the bond that sustained the High Elves' very souls. To linger near it too long was to feel one's essence unravel. It could not be saved. It had to be ended. He returned to the city and spoke the words no one wished to hear. The Sunwell must be destroyed. Some wept, others protested, but none could deny the truth when they looked upon the wound that festered at their kingdom's heart. With a handful of the most trusted and powerful among the Magisters, Kael'thas journeyed to Quel'Thalas and enacted the rite. Their incantations shook the isle to its foundations. The blast sundered the corrupted well and scattered the undead and Amani forces that had lingered like scavengers. When the prince returned, he stood not only as heir to a fallen throne, but as the voice of a people reborn. Beneath the pale light of Silvermoon's ruined spires, Kael'thas named his kin anew, Sin'dorei, the Blood Elves, in honor of those who had fallen and the legacy they must carry forward. The old ways had died with the Sunwell. If Quel'Thalas was to endure, it would do so not in memory but in defiance, rising again from blood, sorrow, and flame. For centuries, the High Elves had lived steeped in its radiant tide, shaped by its arcane warmth from the cradle to the grave. When that light was extinguished, a terrible silence followed. The Blood Elves found their strength diminished, their senses fraying, their bodies gripped by a slow, gnawing ache. A hunger bloomed where the Sunwell had once been, not of the flesh, but of the soul. Though a portion of Silvermoon was secured, its defenses hastily rebuilt around what little remained, most of Quel'Thalas still lay in ruin. The great spires had fallen, the ever-song roads had grown cold, phantoms wandered where families once lived, and the dead, some friend, some foe, refused to lie still. The kingdom had survived, but it was no longer whole. Prince Kael'thas understood that rebuilding would be futile so long as the scourge continued to choke the land. The corpse of Lordaeron still festered in the south, and the plague's armies spilled forth unchecked. He left the guardianship of Quel'Thalas in trusted hands, naming Lor'themar Therin, veteran of the Farstriders and once Sylvanas Windrunner II, as Regent Lord. Then, gathering what warriors remained healthy enough to wield a blade, he turned southward to strike at the Shadow's root. The war had shattered the kingdom's line of rule, and in its aftermath, the Blood Elves reassembled themselves from ashes. Kael'thas claimed the mantle of leadership, but he did not crown himself. In quiet reverence, he honored his father as the last king of the High Elves. From then on, he ruled not as monarch, but as prince, lord, and bearer of a people's broken hope. Lor'themar Therin became regent lord, entrusted with the safeguarding of the realm while the prince marched off to war. Haldorn Brightwing, Therin's oldest comrade, rose to lead the Farstriders as ranger general, filling the void left by the slain Sylvanas Windrunner. In the wake of Grand Magister Belavir's death, the powerful Archmage Romoth took his place as Grand Magister, steward of all arcane matters in the kingdom. The convocation of Silvermoon, once the council that guided Quel'Thalas through ages past, had been slain to the last. It was never restored. From this point on, Kael'thas ruled alone. Though his father had sundered ties with the Alliance, Kael'thas aligned himself with the remnants still resisting the Scourge in Lordaeron. Yet the alliance he returned to was not the one that had once stood beside the elves at Zul'Aman, or bled for Quel'Thalas under Lothar's banner. At its head now was Grand Marshal Garithos, a man promoted not for valor, but for convenience, and driven by deep hatred for those not of human blood. He despised elves most of all. To Kael'thas and his kin, Garithos assigned menial tasks unworthy of their station, and at times orders so reckless they might as well have been death warrants. When the situation grew desperate, Kael'thas turned to unlikely allies, the Night Elves, and later came Lady Vashj and her Naga. Once enemies beneath the waves, now offering truce and strength in the face of common darkness. Their arrival turned the tide. The Naga held the flanks, saved elven lives, and bought time for the Alliance's retreat from Dalaran. But to Garithos and many humans, the Naga were no better than the Scourge. He saw betrayal, not salvation, and Kael'thas' trust in these abominations, as Garithos called the Naga, would soon come at great cost, not only to him, but to all the Blood Elves who followed him into exile. When word reached Garithos that the Naga had aided Kael'thas and his kin, there was no trial, no counsel, no mercy. He condemned them all to death. Treason, he claimed. Though it was survival they had chosen. Shackled and sentenced, the Blood Elves stood at the edge of execution, until the sea came for them. Lady Vashj broke them free with her Naga warriors and carried them across a shattered veil of worlds into Outland, a realm scarred by ancient ruin and bleeding sky. There, in the red wastes of a dying land, Kael'thas met Illidan Stormrage. The demon hunter did not demand fealty. He spoke instead with bitter understanding of exile, of hunger, of power taken and never returned. He saw in Kael'thas a mirror of his own damnation, and Kael'thas saw in Illidan a path forward, one that promised more than survival. It promised strength, purpose, a cure. The prince bent the knee. In the red halls of Black Temple, Kael'thas pledged the loyalty of the Blood Elves to Illidan's cause. Outland became their refuge. Kael'thas remained behind to learn from Illidan, but he sent one trusted voice home, Magister Romoth. Romoth returned to Quel'Thalas cloaked in fell-touched knowledge and bearing Kael'thas' message. He joined Regent Lord Lor'themar Therin carrying word of a promised land beyond the Dark Portal, and the prince's command to prepare the Blood Elves for a new future. But in Outland, the cracks in Kael'thas widened. He could not return to Silvermoon a fugitive prince with empty hands. His people's pain echoed in his bones, and the arcane hunger that gnawed at their souls now consumed his own. Desperate, Kael'thas begged Illidan to share the secrets of fell magic, and when Illidan relented, the prince drank deep. What began as a remedy soon rotted into addiction. Kael'thas turned cruel, restless, ever-reaching. He grew blind to consequence and deaf to doubt. In that darkness, Kil'jaeden the Deceiver found him, and whispered promises into the cracks of his pride. The Demon Lord offered power, glory, redemption, but what he truly sought was a servant. And Kael'thas, hollowed by pain and pride, became the perfect vessel. Back in the ruins of Lordaeron, another shadow stirred. Sylvanas Windrunner now ruled the Forsaken. Undead who had broken from the Scourge and seized Capital City for themselves. She had once given her life to defend the Elven homeland, and now she reached out to it in turn. She sought sanctuary for her people, kinship and exile. But her plea was met with silence. The Blood Elves, wary of all that bore the stench of undeath, refused her. They saw no sister in Sylvanas, only a banshee queen with a hollow army. Whatever sacrifice she made in life, it was lost to them now. In the wake of Kael'thas' departure, Quel'Thalas remained a kingdom suspended between ruin and survival. The Farstriders, few in number and burdened with sorrow, struck tirelessly at the scourge still clawing at the edges of Eversong. But the undead did not tire, and the Blood Elves' thirst for arcane power, once satisfied by the gentle current of the Sunwell, had curdled it into an ache that would not fade. Worse still, the ghosts of betrayal walked the forest once more. Darkon Drathir, twice traitor and now scourge-wrought abomination, had risen from the grave. The same man who had unbound the wards of Silvermoon now haunted the woods he had damned, a bitter shadow in service to a colder master. Far to the north, atop his frozen throne, the Lich King stirred in secret. Though silent to the world, he warred with an ancient force of balance, Malygos, the aspect of magic, over what remained of the Sunwell's essence. In desperation, the red dragon Corialstras had gathered the last fragments of the sacred font and bound them into mortal form, a human woman, Anvina Teague. But secrets carried on the wind, and Darkon found her. He dragged Anvina back to Quel'Thalas, seeking to twist her power for his own foul ends. Yet the kingdom did not stand idle. Sylvanas returned to her homeland, joining Lorthamar Theron, the Farstriders, and the blue dragon Caligos in a rare and desperate alliance. Together, they shattered Darkon once more, this time by Anvina's own hand. Following the altercation with Darkon, the leaders of Quel'Thalas swore a silent pact. Anvina would be sheltered in secret, watched over in a place few would ever know, and Kalik remained by her side. But the land still withered. The Blood Elves remained hollowed by hunger, until Romoth returned. Cloaked in fire-honed wisdom, the Magister brought with him the teachings of Outland, of Kael'thas, or so he claimed. He did not offer comfort, but survival, a way to draw magic from the world itself, from crystals, beasts, even enemies, and siphon it like blood from a vein. For the desperate, it was salvation. Romoth's lessons spread like flame through dry leaves. The broken grew strong, the faint rekindled purpose. Silvermoon stirred, though smoke still curled from its bones, but not all welcomed this new path. A small number of elves recoiled from the practice, deeming it profane, a violation of the balance they once swore to uphold. Their voices grew sharp with dissent, and to preserve unity, they were exiled from the capital, leading them to travel south, to take root in the Quel'Thalan Lodge on the edge of the Plaguelands, a place as scarred as their hearts. The Blood Elves endured, but the wounds of magic, given, taken, and twisted, had only begun to fester. From the shattered heart of Silvermoon, Romoth and his magi summoned fire and memory, light and will. Their spells wove across ruined stone like thread through torn silk. What had taken days to fall rose again in moments. In a single breath of sorcery, the eastern half of Silvermoon was restored, not merely rebuilt, but reborn. Its spires shimmered with arcane brilliance, a defiant beacon of power in a kingdom still haunted by ash and ruin. Emboldened by these teachings from Outland, the Blood Elves pressed outward. The Eversong woods, once blackened by death, now shimmered with life once more. Trees sang again, and the wind no longer carried only the whispers of the dead. Yet beyond the tranquil canopy, the ghostland still festered, a scar where the veil between life and undeath had worn thin. There, the Blood Elves diverged. Some found solace in the safety of Silvermoon's wards, content to guard what remained. But others, bolder, angrier, refused to yield a single stone more to the scourge. They pushed south with blades drawn and banners high, driven by grief, duty, and a yearning to cleanse what had once been sacred ground. Amid this slow resurgence, another power arrived. Muru. Anaru, a being of pure radiant light, was sent from Kael'thas, a prize wrenched from Tempest Keep. He did not come willingly. The elves, desperate to reclaim what they had lost, studied the strange being's energies. They learned not only to harness the light, but to command it. From this wellspring of divine power rose a new order, the Blood Knights. They were not priests, not paladins in the old sense. They were warriors of the light by force of will, trained in shadows, born of necessity and tempered in war. At their head stood Lady Liadrin, once a priestess of the Sunwell, now a blade sworn to the realm, shaped by pain and resolve. Their creed was simple: protect Quel'Thalas at any cost. Where the light had once been a gift, now it was a weapon, and in the eyes of the world, the Blood Elves were no longer victims. They were becoming something else entirely. Though the banners still flew above Silvermoon and its spires caught the light once more, Quel'Thalas was far from healed. The land stirred with unease. In the deep forest, undead remnants slithered like rot beneath the roots, festering beyond the reach of patrols. Along the southern fringes, the drums of the Amani pounded again, ancient enemies roused by the kingdom's weakness, eager to reclaim what had once been theirs. Regent Lord Lor'themar Theron stood at the helm of the kingdom, barely holding together. The army, though brave, was a shadow of its former self. Every sword drawn left another corner undefended, and worse still, a sickness bloomed from within. The wretched. Once magi and scholars, these Blood Elves had pushed Romoth's teachings too far, draining mana without discipline until their minds snapped and their bodies withered. They skulked through the ruins like broken reflections, addicted and dangerous. Yet perhaps the deepest wound of all was the silence from Outland. Kael'thas had not returned. Rumors whispered across the eastern kingdoms. The Legion stirred again, and Kael'thas' forces had splintered. Some said his loyalty faltered, others feared he had fallen to darker temptations. Whatever the truth, Lor'themar could not risk abandoning Quel'Thalas to seek him. The walls would not hold without a steward, and the people would not endure another fall. The Alliance, once allies in blood and war, had turned away. Old scars ran deep. Anastirian's decision to go back into isolation following helping the Alliance had never been forgiven. And few among the humans, dwarves, or night elves cared to bleed for Quel'Thalas again. Worse still, Kael'thas' ties to Illidan and the Naga had only deepened that rift, painting the Blood Elves as faithless and unclean in the eyes of former friends. Sometime later, aid came from the shadows of the south. Sylvanas Windrunner reached out again to Quel'Thalas as the Dark Lady of the Forsaken. Time had twisted their fates. Sylvanas now ruled from the husk of Lordaeron, commanding a kingdom of the dead. Yet when she spoke, it was not with the malice of the Scourge, but with the tempered bitterness of one who remembered. She claimed no right of return, only that she had bled for her people once, and she would not see them fall again. The Blood Elves were slow to trust. Old fears of deception still lingered, memories of how she had died, of what she had become. Some whispered that this was no longer Sylvanas at all, but a thing wearing her voice. Others remembered her sacrifice and dared to hope that some part of their hero still remained beneath the veil of undeath. In the end, pragmaticism triumphed over fear. Forsaken banners rose beside those of the Sin'dorei. Troops marched north into the Ghostlands, where they bolstered the thin red lines of outposts like Tranquillian, holding fast against the Scourge in the encroaching wilds. Their presence was grim but effective, a shield of dark iron when no other aid came. Through this alliance, Sylvanas opened a new path. She spoke of others beyond the eastern kingdoms, of Thrall, war chief of a rising horde reborn not in conquest but in survival. She told Lor'themar of Cairn Bloodhoof, a chieftain of honor, and of new peoples who had known war, exile, and ruin just as the elves had. It was Sylvanas who arranged the meeting, and in the years that followed, the choices made beneath the torn banners of Tranquillian would reshape the fate of Quel'Thalas forever. Though the memory of orcs at the Elf Gates had not faded from Thalassian minds, Lor'themar Theron looked beyond the scars of the past. The Regent had watched Quel'Thalas bleed, and he knew too well the price of pride. The Horde that stood now was not the same as the Horde that had once set Eversong ablaze. This new alliance bore no chains, no demon's leash, and in Thrall and Cairn, he saw not conquerors, but kindred spirits, leaders of broken peoples who had endured fire and exile and had forged strength from ruin. Sylvanas had opened the door. Lor'themar stepped through. He spoke of Quel'Thalas, not as it had been, but as it could be, and in return, Thrall and Cairn listened. They saw a people not yet fallen, not yet finished. The Sin'dorei had stood against annihilation. They had carved life from ash. To the war chief and the high chieftain, the elf story mirrored their own. a tale of resilience and of honor tempered by hardship. After much talk, an accord was struck. The hand of peace was offered, and Northamar took it. In doing so, Quel'Thalas stepped into a new era, no longer isolated behind runestones and pride, but bound by a pact of necessity and survival. The Blood Elves would lend their unmatched arcane skill to the Horde's growing arsenal, and the Horde, in turn, would lend ships, soldiers, and strength. It was a bargain struck not from desperation, but from understanding, and it gave the Blood Elves the means to finally reach their absent prince beyond the Dark Portal. Yet one specter still barred their full acceptance. In the south, at the terminus of the Dead Scar, a ruin pulsed with necrotic power, Deathholm, the last bastion of the Scourge in Quel'Thalas, and at its black heart stood a name that refused to die. Darkhan Drathir, traitor, sorcerer, and puppet of the Lich King. He had risen again, this time not to betray but to command. The elves knew the truth. As long as Darkhan lived, they would never be free. Not in body, not in memory. And so, if the Sin'dorei were to take their place among the Horde, not as guests but as equals, then Deathholm had to fall, and Darkhan had to die. To that end, the Blood Elves raised the Sanctum of the Sun, a bastion of flame and defiance planted in the shadow of the Citadel. From there, Magister Kael'thas rallied the kingdom's might, calling for allies bold enough to strike at the rotting heart of the Ghostlands. Adventurers, rangers, and spellbreakers answered. Together they drove back the dead, not just to cull their numbers, but to break their chains of command. Darkhan's lieutenants fell first. Each was a pillar in the Scourge's ranks, and with their ruin came disarray. In the depths of the crypts and torture dens, the living were pulled back from the brink. Thalassian prisoners whose names still mattered, Apprentice Varnus, Ranger Vidoran, and Apothecary Enith. Then came the final order. Kael'thas named it plainly. Darkhan's death, and his head as proof. No illusion, no exile. Only the blade. And when the deed was done, when the traitor who had sold Silvermoon to Arthas was at last undone by the very hands he once betrayed, it was not just vengeance they carried back, it was a banner. Quel'Thalas had risen from its knees. The Sin'dorei were no longer merely survivors. With the fall of Deathholm, they claimed their place in the Horde, not in shadow but in strength. With the blood of Quel'Thalas scattered across worlds, an old enemy stirred once more. The warlord of the Amani, Zul'jin, had watched the rise and fall of empires. He had seen his people driven into the forest like beasts, scattered, hunted, forgotten. But the trolls did not forget, and Zul'jin, fiercest of them all, remembered every insult carved into Amani flesh. Now, with the Sin'dorei's strength bled thin across Outland, the warlord saw his moment. The gates of Zul'aman opened and hate poured forth. It was more than vengeance. Zul'jin believed the elves would one day turn their new allies, the Horde, against the forest trolls, and so he struck first. Within the shadowed halls of his mountain citadel, Amani priests called down the fury of ancient Loa. Their rites twisted warriors into living avatars of the beasts they revered, feral, towering, unstoppable. Troll blood boiled with primal power, war drums beat like thunder through the Ghostlands. The threat was not just to Quel'Thalas, but to the Horde itself. A second warfront could shatter what unity remained. The answer came not in legions, but in blades. A strike force of the Horde's most seasoned champions, sent to sever the head of the beast before it could break across the land. They did not march as an army, they stalked like shadows. Through bloodied halls and sacrificial fires they moved, cutting down beasts born of Loa and flame. And at the heart of the storm they found Zul'jin. The old warlord fought with the fury of a world that had wronged him. But fury alone could not turn the tide. When he fell, the rituals died with him. The threat to Quel'Thalas and to the Horde ended in silence. Zul'aman remained, and its war cry had been answered and silenced. From the blackened stars beyond the veil, Kil'jaeden the Deceiver peered once more toward Quel'Thalas. He had felt it, the echo of light still pulsing faintly in the earth, a lingering ember of the Sunwell not yet gone cold. But it was not just raw power that stirred beneath the ruined spires, it had taken form. Anvina, the girl forged from the Sunwell's spark, living unknowingly as its avatar. In her, the deceiver saw a door, a vessel through which he might step into Azeroth itself. Yet brute force would not avail him here. Quel'Thalas still held its wards and watchers, so Kil'jaeden sent whispers wrapped in flesh. His agents cloaked in guise of blood elves, seeded into Silvermoon's highest circles. They moved unseen among those rebuilding the shattered kingdom, listening, prying, learning. And what they learned was everything. They uncovered the truth of Anvina's being, but they also saw the other piece still in play. Kael'thas Sunstrider, a prince marooned in purpose, a soul flayed by failure and burned hollow by fell fire. Once the last hope of his people, Kael'thas had become unmoored, unable to return home, unwilling to surrender the promises he had made. The deceiver reached for him, not with chains, but with a vision. Kael'thas was told he could still bring salvation, that the power to reignite the Sunwell, to lift the Sin'dorei from their hunger, was within reach. And so the prince, proud, broken, and desperate, made his final bargain. He would guide the Legion through the veiled paths of Quel'Thalas. He would deliver to them the land's most sacred heart. Yet not all truths were his to know. In Silvermoon, Lor'themar Theron and his inner council had hidden Anvina's identity from Kael'thas. They knew he sought redemption, but feared what he might do if he learned the girl's secret. Anvina was more than a chance at rebirth. She was the Sunwell given breath and memory. If Kael'thas sought to use her, or worse, deliver her to darker hands, then the light might be extinguished forever. Quel'Thalas stood, but only barely. One misstep, one more fracture, and it would not rise again. Time had a cruel way of thinning hope. In the gilded walls of Silvermoon, Lor'themar still carried the burden of loyalty, not just to his people, but to the prince who had once stood as their beacon. But each passing season in silence deepened his unease. Kael'thas had promised a paradise beyond the dark portal, a land where their suffering would end. Yet no return came, no word, no sign. The regent's heart began to shift. He feared Kael'thas was lost, not dead, but drifting, severed from the land that had shaped him. Lor'themar believed that the only way to reach him now was with truth, a truth that could restore hope. He resolved to tell the Prince of Anvina of the Sunwell's last ember, hidden and alive. But the message never found its mark. Kil'jaeden, ever watching, understood what such hope might unravel. If Kael'thas believed the Sunwell could be restored by elven hands alone, the grip of the Legion would falter. So the deceiver moved in shadow, and the letters were silenced, intercepted, erased, never delivered. Kael'thas remained isolated, his desperation carefully stoked by whispers that only the Legion could offer salvation. The trap was complete. And yet truth has a way of bleeding through. In Outland, Kael'thas had left a stain too deep to ignore. His warpaths, his conquest, the green fire behind his eyes. They revealed more than ambition. Among his own forces, defectors rose. The Scryers, blood elves who had turned from their prince in horror, warned that Kael'thas had given himself to the Burning Legion. At first, many of the Sin'dorei and the Horde refused to believe. Their prince was a savior, not a traitor. But in the Netherstorm, denial met reality. There, Kael'thas' citadel stood beneath shattered skies, a fortress not of redemption but corruption. Fell crystals pulsed in the open, demons walked freely among his guard, and the once noble prince ruled with fire and madness. No words were needed. The truth was carved into the land itself. Back in Quel'Thalas, the tidings struck like thunder. Lor'themar and his council could grieve no longer. Kael'thas had crossed a line from which there was no return. Their prince was gone, and in his place stood a servant of the Legion. With aching hearts and steel resolve, the Blood Elves cast their final judgment. Kael'thas must be stopped. The Horde moved to war. Champions stormed Tempest Keep, breaking through the prince's last defenses and striking him down upon the cold floors of his sanctum. But death did not claim him. Kil'jaeden had foreseen this. As Kael'thas fell, the Deceiver's magic swept in, stole the broken prince from the edge of oblivion, and bound him with fell enchantments that unspooled what little remained of his mind. Kael'thas Sunstrider had not died that day. He had become something else, a hollow vessel bound in service to the Legion's will. To the north of Quel'Thalas, across waves tinged with memory, the fallen prince returned home. Kael'thas Sunstrider, now little more than a vessel for the Burning Legion's will, made his final move. With the last of his loyalists behind him, he invaded the Isle of Quel'Thalas, sacred ground where the ashes of the Sunwell still lingered. Under the watchful gaze of Kil'jaeden, Kael'thas set in motion the end of all things. He had captured Muru, the bound Naru once held in Silvermoon, and Anvina, the mortal vessel of the Sunwell's essence. Both were dragged to the heart of the Sunwell Plateau. There, Kael'thas drew on them like a wellspring, siphoning Muru's divine light, bleeding Anvina's soul-bound power. The Sunwell stirred once more, but not as salvation. He would use it as a gate, a blazing wound in reality through which Kil'jaeden could step into Azeroth. But whispers traveled faster than fellfire. Some among Kael'thas' own people, sickened by what they had seen, turned from him and carried word to the Horde. Among them was Lady Liadrin, who had watched in horror as Kael'thas seized Muru. That moment destroyed what loyalty remained. She journeyed to Shatroth, laid bare her failures, and swore herself to a new purpose. Not vengeance, but redemption. There, the lines were redrawn. Liadrin pledged her strength to the Shattered Sun Offensive, a union of Horde and Alliance forged in desperation. Together they set sail for Quel'Thalas as the last shield against the Abyss. Kael'thas' armies, warped by Felon Legion flame, clashed with the vanguard of the offensive. Demons poured from every crevice, but the line held. Liadrin led from the front, her blood knights no longer hollow shells, but warriors tempered by purpose. Through attrition and sacrifice, they shattered the prince's concentration, breaking the spellwork just long enough for reinforcements to breach the plateau. The gates to the Sunwell stood open, and beyond them, the final battle waited. The Sunwell burned once more, not with salvation, but with the fury of invasion. From both Horde and Alliance, champions answered the call. Battle-worn hands reached across bitter history, standing shoulder to shoulder beneath the banners of the Shattered Sun Offensive. Together, they moved to break the last of Kael'thas' strongholds. Lady Liadrin, her crimson tabard stained with sea salt and demon ash, directed the Horde's finest toward the heart of the Isle. The Magister's Terrace, once a sanctum of study, had become a mad prince's refuge. There, Kael'thas awaited, bloated with fel, mind shattered by failure, and soul chained to a master who cared nothing for his legacy. No longer the fallen son of Quel'Thalas, Kael'thas had become something else entirely. The last to wear the name Sunstrider now raved like a prophet without a future. The champions cut him down not as a prince nor even a traitor, but as a madman. Where once he had fallen crying out for his homeland, this time he died in dabbling ruin. With him ended the bloodline that had ruled Quel'Thalas for nearly 7,000 years. But even in death, his legacy smoldered. High above the fallen terrace, Kil'jaeden the Deceiver breached the veil. From the core of the Sunwell, the Demon Lord clawed his way into Azeroth, half-born and burning. The Alliance drove into the heart of the Sunwell Plateau, but even their most valiant efforts faltered beneath the weight of the Legion's fury. Then, as if drawn by some last flicker of memory, Anvina stepped forward. She knew who she was now, not a human, but a wellspring. Not mortal, but memory bound in flesh. She gave herself willingly, pouring the last of her light into the breach. Her voice was the last lullaby the demon heard as his body unraveled, drawn back into the void from which he came. The gateway closed. The burning crusade had been turned aside, but the cost, as always, was steep. In the wake of Kael'thas' dark rites, the Sunwell stood tainted once more. Shadows danced beneath its surface, and its radiant glow shimmered with sickness. Left unchecked, the corruption would seep through the land like poison in the veins of a wounded king. Some, including Lor'themar, considered destroying it again, to let the sacred font die rather than doom their people anew. The Sunwell lay flickering and corrupted, its once pristine water stained by fell ritual and broken oaths, and beside it, the last remnant of a falling star, Muru. The Naru once entrusted to Silvermoon's care, now reduced to a dimly pulsing heart of light. Yet even in death, the Naru shimmered with possibility. Velen knelt beside the fallen being, his fingers brushing the crystalline shell of its core. In that quiet moment, he saw, not just with eyes, but with soul. hope had not fled this place. Drawing upon the heart of Muru, Velen poured light into the wound. Where Fel had scorched the wellspring, radiance now bloomed. Holy energy surged through the Sunwell, laced with the arcane currents of its ancient design. What had been marred now burned pure, a fusion of light and magic intertwined. The sky above blazed gold, and the land stirred as if waking from a long nightmare. Across the forest of Quel'Thalas, elves looked skyward, and in their chests, something long withered began to stir again. The Sunwell had returned. Its light no longer whispered only of power, now it spoke of purpose. For the first time since the fall, the Blood Elves did not hunger. They no longer clawed at scraps of stolen energy or bound their will to uncertain foes. The well, reborn, sustained them as it had in ages past. And for the Blood Knights, forged in defiance and despair, this was a turning point. Where once they had wrestled the light from the void of Muru's suffering, now it came freely, channeled through the renewed spring, not as a weapon of desperation, but as a gift in balance with their arcane birthright. The prophet looked upon the gleaming waters, his voice low and certain. This was only the first step. The years had not been kind to Quel'Thalas. From the scourging of its sacred woods to the betrayal of its prince, the Elven kingdom had stood at the brink more than once, and only just recently clawed its way back. But now, with the Sunwell restored and burning anew with holy light and arcane brilliance, a different future stirred on the horizon, not one of grief and ruin, but of purpose. The Blood Elves, once fractured and fading, began to rise again, sustained by the reborn wellspring. They no longer clung to borrowed magic or the edge of desperation. Their minds cleared, their resolve sharpened. With blade and spell, they turned outward to defend their homeland, not just from enemies at their gates, but from the shadows that had once devoured their own hearts. In the prince's absence, it was Lor'themar who bore the crownless mantle. There was little doubt among his people who guided Quel'Thalas now. Under his leadership, the Isle of Quel'Thalas was reclaimed, its sacred plateau sealed once more from foreign tread. The Sunwell, guarded and renewed, was now open only to the sons and daughters of the High Home. Those few who survived the shattered campaigns of Outland returned from the waste with haunted eyes and humbled purpose. Lor'themar did not cast them aside. He sent them to stand beside the Farstriders, defending the wild borders of Quel'Thalas, ensuring that no enemy might ever again breach the spires of Silvermoon. Yet danger had already begun to rear its ugly head in the elves' direction. In the shadowed years after Zul'jin's fall, the halls of Zul'Aman stood still, heavy with the silence of a dream undone. But silence does not mean surrender. When the world fractured in the cataclysm, the drums began again, this time carried on the backs of Zandalari emissaries. Beneath their banners, the shattered Amani found purpose once more, uniting under a new warlord, Dakara. He bore the fire of Zul'jin in his blood and vowed to finish what the old Warbringer had begun, to raise a troll empire from the bones of history. In the dark corners of the Ghostlands, war drums beat once more. A new Amani empire gathered beneath the blood-streaked banners of Zul'Aman. It was said they would strike first at Quel'Thalas, as they always had. But the elves would not stand alone. From the Echo Isles came Vol'jin, chieftain of the Darkspear, whose people had long feuded with the forest trolls, and beside him, bearing the Windrunner name with her own fire and fury, came Verisa. Together with Ranger General Haldoran Brightwing, they moved to meet the threat before it could rise. Beneath the twisted canopy of Zul'Aman, 3 banners were unfurled in defiance: Darkspear, Silver Covenant, and Farstrider. Each a pledge that Quel'Thalas would not fall quietly. It was not long before the champions of the Horde and Alliance stormed the gates once more. Dakara, like the warlord before him, fell within Zul'Aman's blood-stained walls, and with him, the Amani dream crumbled again, swallowed by the very echoes that had once fueled it. In the wake of the Purge of Dalaran, the red-cloaked Sunreavers returned to Quel'Thalas not as emissaries but as fugitives. Archmage Aethys Sunreaver, stripped of title and trust, came home bearing bitter news and a bitter wound, proof that the old alliances had fractured beyond repair. Dalaran, once a shared city of learning, had turned on them with steel and spell. The Kirin Tor had cast them out. In response, the Thalassian court stirred. No longer would Quel'Thalas entrust its fate to foreign kingdoms and fragile accords. It was time at last to act with its own hand. On a shattered island stronghold belonging to Emperor Lei Shen, relics of a bygone empire lay waiting to be claimed. Lor'themar marshaled his forces, the Sunreaver onslaught, and cast them against the Kirin Tor offensive, not merely to reclaim dignity but to seize power. Two truths guided his campaign. The first, justice. The Sunreavers had been betrayed by those who once called them allies. The Blood Elves would no longer bow to that betrayal. The second, preparation. Lor'themar had seen the fault lines forming within the Horde. Garrosh Hellscream's rule was no longer one of unity but domination, and should rebellion ignite, Quel'Thalas would not be caught defenseless. On the Isle of Thunder, his foresight bore fruit. Heroes loyal to the Blood Elves unearthed the crystal pulsing with the violent energies of the Dark Animus, a fragment of power born from the Emperor's own monstrous creations. Lor'themar took it in hand and brought it to the promontory, where a dormant Animus golem lay in wait. With careful precision, his archmagi awakened the construct and set it to slumber again. A weapon kept in reserve, studied in secret, should war come to the Horde's doorstep. And war did come. When open rebellion against Garrosh Hellscream tore across Kalimdor and Pandaria alike, the Blood Elves did not hesitate. Reinforcements crossed the seas from Lordaeron, blades sharp and banners high, to join the uprising.
Bladefist Bay is fortified! By the Sunwell, we're getting slaughtered. Heroes, port over to the docks and take out their shore defenses. Put a stop to this bloodshed.
I can raise your dead, Regent Lord. Your rangers can fight again.
Sylvanas, you will leave our corpses alone, or I will deal with you here and now.
I'm sorry to see your lack of commitment. What of the human corpses?
Well, I suppose that's between you and the Alliance, isn't it?
Rise, my angels. Let your screams fill the streets of Orgrimmar with terror. Garrosh really has gone all out this time, hasn't he? I expected more spikes, honestly.
The Cinderai would not stand behind, but beside, those who dared defy tyranny. For Quel'Thalas had learned its lesson. Never again would it place its future in another's hands. The drums of war thundered against the red walls of Orgrimmar as the final reckoning approached. From the jagged cliffs above Bladefist Bay to the scorched sands of Durotar, the city stood barricaded and bristling, a fortress of Garrosh Hellscream's making. The Kor'kron held the gates like zealots guarding a tomb, sealing off the city's arteries with steel and blood. But the world had turned against the warchief. Vol'jin's rebellion marched down the spine of the main road, siege engines in tow, their banners ragged but unbowed. At the harbor, Alliance warships surged into the bay under a storm of cannon smoke, landing parties spilling onto the docks to seize a foothold. Skirmishes erupted along every threshold, but the true battle had only just begun. Vol'jin's uprising surged to the city's heart, slamming against the gates like a tide that would not be turned. Ram after ram struck the walls, and still they held. Siege fire scorched the sky, but Orgrimmar's outer skin would not crack. Then came the Armada. From the sea, Lor'themar Therin led the Blood Elves in open defiance of Garrosh. At his side flew the banners of Varian Wrynn, Jaina Proudmoore, and Sylvanas Windrunner. Together, their combined fleet shattered the city's naval defenses and turned the tide inland. Night Elf glaive throwers, guided by Tyrande Whisperwind's command, joined the fray. With precision and fury, they brought the main gate down. The flood began. Allied forces surged into the city's heart. The Valley of Strength was won in blood and smoke, and General Nazgrim, loyal to the bitter end, fell defending it. With his death, the upper city fell. Beneath Orgrimmar's streets, invaders uncovered the scope of Garrosh's ambition, a vast subterranean stronghold forged in secret, pulsing with the power of dark experiments and buried hatred. Adventurers pressed into the underhold, cutting through Garrosh's final defenses, until at last, the warchief himself was brought low. Not slain, but shackled. When the dust settled, the rebellion stood victorious. The Horde was broken, but not dead. Before the battered banners and assembled champions, Thrall stepped forward. His voice rang clear.
disappoint me, Garrosh. You are not worthy of your father's legacy.
His punishment is not for you alone to decide.
I won't let you take him.
We have all suffered from his atrocities. My people, more than any other. Let him stand trial in Pandaria. There, we will mete out justice for all. The Horde needs its true war chief, now more than ever.
Yes, but it was you that held the Horde together during this madness. It was you that protected our honor. From this day forward, Vol'jin, if you lead, I will follow.
I am not worthy. But I will give my all for the Horde. I will speak to your war chief. I speak for the Horde. Very well. The Horde has committed heinous crimes, Vol'jin. But some among you fought against Garrosh's tyranny. For that, I am willing to end this bloodshed. But know this. If your Horde fails to uphold honor as Garrosh did, we will end you.
And so the Alliance withdrew. The siege was over. With Gazlo's guidance, the work of rebuilding began. Not just stone and timber, but trust, honor, and the idea of what the Horde could become. As the shadows of the broken shore gathered, war drums beat once more across the eastern kingdoms. In the sun-drenched halls of Silvermoon, a conclave of Blood Elf paladins stood before the sacred light of the Sunwell, invoking its radiance not for themselves but for their allies. Through blade and prayer, they channeled that holy brilliance into the weapons of the Horde's vanguard, blessing their steel for the battles ahead. For all the fractures and doubts that had plagued their people in the past, the Sin'dorei stood firm in this new age, not as followers, but as defenders of a united cause. Even far beyond Quel'Thalas, the Sunwell's influence endured. At the Netherlight Temple, where light and shadow walked in an uneasy accord, priests gathered sacred fragments from holy sites across the world. One such relic came from the Sunwell itself, a token of its enduring strength shared with those who vowed to wield it wisely. In time, the echoes of war shifted eastward, toward the ancient city of Suramar, where the Nightfallen rebellion surged against the Legion's grip. Arcane gates shimmered between Silvermoon and Suramar, opening the way for Blood Elven warbands to march through. From the tranquil groves of Meridil to the violet ramparts of the city itself, Sin'dorei spellbreakers and blade singers fought alongside their Shal'dorei cousins, united by purpose and shared history. In victory, a new bond was forged. Lor'themar Therin, ever the measured regent, saw in first Arcanist Tharisra a mirror of his own burdens, a leader guiding a fractured people toward rebirth. He welcomed her to Silvermoon with honor, and in time, Suramar pledged itself to the Horde, standing with Quel'Thalas not only in treaty but in kinship. Their kingdoms, once isolated and proud, now shared a common future. But not all reunions were so welcome. Alleria Windrunner, sister of Silvermoon, exiled by choice and changed by fate, returned to her homeland for the first time in centuries. She came not with hostility but with a plea, to leave the Horde and rejoin the Alliance. Yet her path through the void had left scars no light could ignore. The Sunwell trembled in her presence. To the Sin'dorei, Her very presence was a threat, not to their pride, but to the wellspring that sustained their rebirth. Her proposal was declined, and so Valeria sought others, those exiled from Silvermoon, cast out for their own experiments with the void. In her, they saw power without chains. In them, she saw a future the Blood Elves had turned away from. Where this path would lead was yet uncertain, but one truth rang clear through the marble halls of Silvermoon. The light may guide Quel'Thalas, but its shadows still walk just beyond the walls. Following the battle for Lordaeron, as the banners of the Horde were torn down across the eastern kingdoms, Quel'Thalas stood resolute. The ancient kingdom, long accustomed to survival in the face of ruin, once more became a stronghold amid the chaos. Though the Blood Elves played but a measured role in the greater war, their warriors stood firm alongside the Horde during the battle for Stromgarde, and marched under its colors during the grinding faction assaults that bloodied both land and sea. Yet no foe brought greater peril than the war within. As the Horde fractured, torn between the honor-bound path of Varrock Sourfang and the dark designs of Sylvanas Windrunner, Lor'themar looked once more to history, and chose resolve over vengeance. The regent of Quel'Thalas pledged his allegiance to Sourfang's rebellion, believing that the soul of the Horde could not endure under the shadow of the Banshee Queen. Though his people bore old scars from Orcish wars, they had also learned what it meant to rebuild, and when to stand against a leader who had strayed beyond redemption. In time, Sylvanas fell, and when the dust of N'Zoth's demise settled over a weary world, the Horde's leaders convened not to crown a new war chief, but to chart a new path. Power would no longer be vested in one voice, but in a council of equals, each realm with its own seat, its own say. Among them, Lor'themar Theron, voice of the Sin'dorei, and regent of a kingdom that had endured fire, betrayal, and war, took his place. In the quiet that followed the breaking of the jailer's chains, the lands of Quel'Thalas knew no peace. Darkness stirred once more beyond the Ghostlands, and the dead clawed their way back toward the living.
These reports are alarming, Lady Liadrin. Tranquillion is in danger of being overrun by Scourge?
Their forces appear far too organized for this to be some random attack. Perhaps we should request additional aid from our Horde allies.
And waste more time awaiting their arrival? No. We must address this at once.
Then we must call up those still in training. We will hold the line and keep Quel'Thalas safe. I swear it.
Very well. I will open the way and meet you in Tranquillion.
Lady Liadrin, are you sure about bringing up trainees to fight? This is no mere training exercise.
I am. You will find their skills are more than adequate, but I shall let their performance prove it. They are ready.
I look forward to good news then. May the Eternal Sun guide you, Liadrin.
Finally! It feels as if I've been in training for ages. Send me to Tranquillion!
Salandria, this will be no easy task. More will be expected of you than any other.
Then I should prove myself, right? You said it yourself. We'll hold the line and keep Quel'Thalas safe. I intend to do just that.
Go then, and scout beyond the Dead Scar. Report back to Tranquillion with what you find.
At the head rode Vorath, a twisted remnant of the Sand Lane, cloaked in the ruinous vestiges of the Scourge. With cunning and cruelty, he sought to rekindle the dread of old, leading a renewed assault against the Blood Elven homeland. For the Sin'dorei, it was not merely another invasion, it was a shadow of a past they had bled to survive. The Dead Scar, still etched like a wound across the land, had never truly healed. But this time, Quel'Thalas did not face the darkness shattered and alone. Summoning their strength, the Blood Elves stood as one, rangers stringing bows beneath the eaves of Eversong, magisters shaping fire and storm from the spires of Silvermoon, and paladins kindling the light anew at the Sunwell's edge. The Scourge broke upon their defenses like waves upon stone, and in the end, Vorath fell, his ambition undone by a people who refused to kneel to fear a second time. When the last echoes of undeath faded from the glades, Lor'themar Theron stood before his kin, not as ruler alone, but as witness to their resolve. He spoke not of vengeance nor of glory, but of unity. Quel'Thalas had held the line, and in doing so, they proved that the soul of their kingdom burned brighter than the shadows that sought to claim it.
Shorel Aran.
I will inform the Ebon Blade of what transpired. If the Scourge caused such problems here, I suspect matters in Northrend may be even worse. But regardless, your efforts must be lauded. When our lands were threatened, you stood strong and held the line.
You have demonstrated cunning, determination, and integrity. Hallmarks of what it means to be a Blood Knight. Accept this gift as a symbol of your dedication and bravery. We will never forget that your aid was instrumental in ending this crisis. For Quel'Thalas.
For Quel'Thalas.
So before we end off for today, I just want to talk about a couple things. WoW's use of the word demigod is a bit weird. In the real world, demigod, as most people might know, is the term used for when a god has a relation with a mortal and they have a kid. The kid becomes the demigod, who typically either has longevity or abilities from the god. You know, from like Zeus, you might have ability to control some form of electricity or lightning and be super strong. Hercules, Perseus, all those, you know, demigods of history, of mythology, I mean. So it's a bit weird when the lore refers to the Loa, which are known as the wild gods, as demigods. So even though they're referred to as demigods, they are still full-fledged gods, or I guess possibly lesser gods. So it was a bit weird, but finally figured that one out. But I don't know if that might have confused anyone else, but it confused me for a while. So with all that said and done, hopefully you did enjoy. I look very much forward to the future rebuilding of Silvermoon in Midnight, and I cannot wait to explore it more and dive into all the stories going on there. So thanks for checking it out. And please, do take care of yourself. See you in the next one.